Welcome to the deep dive. I think we all know the feeling.
Yeah.
You want to understand something really complex really well, but you don't want to spend weeks slogging through dense material.
Right.
Like that's why you're here. That's what we're all about. Going deep, but being efficient with your time. Today, we're diving into Burn Rate, the book by Andy Dunn, founder of Bonobos.
Yep.
Now, this isn't your typical entrepreneur story, all chest thumping and bravado. This one gets pretty real.
Yeah, it does. It's a pretty raw and honest look at his journey, both building the business and his own struggles with mental health.
Exactly. So we've got the table of contents, the author's note, and then a bunch of excerpts of different points in the book so we can really trace these themes across his whole experience.
And that's really what we're trying to do with this deep dive. We want to understand the intersection of, being an entrepreneur, all the pressures that come with that, and then how that intertwines with these mental health challenges.
Right. Okay, so let's dive in. So part one really focuses on the early signs and how his identity was forming. And one thing that jumped out at me was the nickname he got in high school, Windu.
Oh, yeah, White Hindu, right?
Yeah. He said it bothered him, but he never let it show, even though, his family thought it was hilarious.
It's interesting how that even early on, that really sort of shaped how he dealt with, being vulnerable,
Yeah.
He talks about having thin skin, but really quickly putting up this, front of not caring. And, I think that becomes a really a big theme throughout the book, this masking, especially when things get tough.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it seems to clash with, he's hyper-competitive in high school. Quiz bowl, math team, sports, he's driven.
Totally.
And then you have this anecdote about him, covering this kid, Walton's car, in mud.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like, maybe some of that fragility comes out in other ways, almost like aggression.
It's that need to prove himself, maybe overcompensating, right? And he actually ties that back later. He talks about these kind of central casting traits of the male entrepreneur, this expectation to be strong and confident all the time, but maybe hiding those insecurities underneath.
Absolutely. And then he goes to Northwestern and pledges Sigma Chi, which he describes as this playground of white male privilege, right?
Yeah.
And so that environment, study hard, play hard, ambition, status symbols. He even talks about envying a BMW with the license plate MLTS.
Melt, yeah.
Yeah, melt. I mean, I feel like all those things just amp up the pressure even more.
Totally. It's that constant need to perform, and not show any weakness. Everyone's striving, everyone's comparing themselves. It's got to be intense.
Yeah. And it's during this time at Northwestern that mental health first kind of enters his awareness, but indirectly. There's his frat brother, Ruben, who's having these episodes, but it's all very hush-hush.
Yeah, spoken about in whispers almost, it's something to be ashamed of.
Right. And it's so different from how Andy experiences things later on, which is interesting.
I think it speaks to, just the stigma around mental health, right? Especially back then. It was this hidden thing. No one talked about it openly. And, Andy hadn't really experienced it personally, so there was this distance.
Totally. Then fast forward to his summer internship at Deloitte. He gets in trouble with this fake ID thing, ends up with legal consequences. And, his dad is really disappointed, angry even, which is a new experience for Andy.
Yeah, that felt like a real turning point. For the first time, there were serious repercussions for his actions. And, that parental disapproval probably really hit him hard.
Yeah. Then there's this whole experience with magic mushrooms in the Rockies.
Oh, yeah. With Camila, his first serious girlfriend.
Yeah. And he describes it as being in this unfiltered dream state. And there's this part where he makes up this whole story to comfort his friend. And in that moment, it feels like the right thing to do. And it makes me think about, how that kind of blurring of reality, is that an early sign of what's to come?
It's very possible, right? I mean, psychedelics, they can be really intense, and they can definitely change your perception of what's real and what's not.
Yeah. And then this leads us to his first full-blown manic episode at Northwestern. And it seems like it starts with hypomania, all this excitement about getting married to this woman he just met, and then it escalates quickly into full-blown mania. He talks about a watermelon being his reincarnated grandfather.
Right, and that internal monologue, thinking he's the Messiah, believing God is a woman, it's a complete shift in his thinking.
And his behavior, confronting strangers at Burger King, thinking Camila was God, writing a manifesto.
Right.
Must have been so scary for his friends to witness.
Absolutely. I mean, it's classic mania, right? Elevated mood, racing thoughts, impaired judgment. He's completely lost touch with reality.
And even on the drive home, he's like having these intense thoughts about like white men, forgiveness, drugs, all filtered through his reading of Guns, Germs, and Steel. It's just a very strange mix.
It's like his existing knowledge and ideas are being twisted and amplified by the mania. It shows how deeply it affects his whole way of thinking.
And so his dad ends up taking him to this psychiatric ER.
With that family joke, he's headed up north.
Yeah, it's like a way to cope, maybe.
Yeah, but it also shows how serious things have gotten. They recognize he needs help.
Definitely. His time at the psych ward, though, it sounds so disorienting. Like his perception of everything is off. He still believes God is a woman.
He's still very much in the grip of the mania, right? His internal world is completely disconnected from reality.
And finally, he gets the diagnosis. Bipolar disorder, type I. His parents are asking about potential triggers, but his reaction is interesting, saying he is bipolar. Not that he has bipolar disorder. It's like the label itself is already weighing on him.
It really shows how the stigma immediately kicks in. It's this feeling of being defined by the diagnosis, instead of seeing it as a medical condition you're managing.
Absolutely. So moving into part two, he's navigating this whole world of entrepreneurship now with this diagnosis. And we're introduced to Spally, his business partner, super accomplished athlete, which is interesting given Andy's background.
Yeah, they had very different experiences with athletics growing up. Spally seemed much more naturally gifted.
And Spally becomes kind of a mentor figure, even gives Andy some memorable advice early on. Like he tells him to watch out for the 5 white devils.
Which were arrogance, entitlement, fear, greed, and I always forget the 5th one.
Yeah, me too. But, it shows there are different approaches to business and life in general.
Right. Spally's more grounded and cautious, and you can already see how those contrasting viewpoints are going to play out.
Amy talks about all these early failed startup ideas he had in business school before they landed on the bonobos concept.
The idea to build a brand online inspired by Zappos. I mean, that was pretty cutting edge back then.
Totally. Like selling clothes online, really focusing on the customer experience.
Right. And they have some early fundraising success, bringing in angel investors like Andy Rachleff, who saw the potential. But even then, there are these insightful questions like Rachleff asks, why New York? And Andy's answer is basically because he wants to live there.
It's a good reminder that, sometimes personal desires drive these huge business decisions.
Exactly. And not always for the best, strategically speaking.
Their early days are classic startup stuff. Bootstrapping, working from a group house, even living in a yurt for a bit. And there's that funny story about trying to design and sell, baseball-themed pants for his friend's wedding.
Which, highlights the trial and error of startups. Not every idea, no matter how passionate you are, is going to be a winner.
And then they moved to New York. This whole new set of challenges. They're first-time founders, in the fashion industry no less, and Andy admits he doesn't have much fashion sense.
He talks about his, quote, weird combinations of clothing. I mean, it's relatable, right? You're figuring things out as you go.
Totally. But they start getting traction, getting orders from some pretty high-profile people. They hire their first employee, and then they discover some major problems with their accounting. There's that whole thing with Melody and her associates, which sounds kind of scary.
It just shows, even when things are going well, there can be these unexpected challenges you have to deal with.
Right. Their design partnership with Spally, though, that seems to be working really well.
Spally is creating the designs, and they're successful. But they have these very different working styles, and everything is moving so fast. And Andy says, looking back, that this intensity, this ambition, it might have been both fueled and threatened by his bipolar disorder.
It's like a double-edged sword.
Exactly. That hypomanic energy, it can drive you to achieve incredible things, but it can also be really destabilizing, lead to bad decisions.
He even talks about this moment where he impulsively decides to go inspect pipes in a potential new office space.
Just out of the blue.
Yeah, driven by this hypomanic energy. Spally eventually moves to New York. They're kind of operating as co-CEOs. And there's this funny story about how their friends are like, whatever you do, don't live together.
I think they could sense the intensity of their relationship, it was already so intertwined. Adding that extra layer might have been too much.
They set up shop in the pants loft, and Spally even tries to, improve Andy's fashion sense, which is kind of funny. But underneath all that, there's this power dynamic shifting, with Andy eventually giving Spanley the CEO title.
And Andy recognizes that,
Yeah.
He knows there's this inherent power in having been the one to invite Spanley to be CEO.
Right. And they bring on these key early hires, Sarah Gray, Tiffany Papa, who becomes like the unofficial gatekeeper. These early team members are so important, for shaping the culture of a company.
Totally. They set the tone for everything.
But at its core, Andy sees this, like a fundamental incompatibility between himself and Spanley. Spanley is this pragmatist, focused on the product. Andy is the dreamer, wanting to expand rapidly. And the burn rate is increasing, and Andy starts to resent Spanley's authority.
And it really creates this friction between them. They have these different visions for the company, different approaches to risk.
And Andy even admits that he was so focused on this conflict with Spanley that he completely ignored his own mental well-being.
Yeah.
Like all that external pressure just blinded him to what was happening internally.
It's a good reminder that, even when you're dealing with all these external challenges, you can't neglect your own mental health.
Okay, part 3 is where things really escalate. Andy's describing the onset of depression now, increased need for sleep, lack of joy, and he's using substances to try and maintain this, image of vibrancy.
Right. And there's that interesting contrast between how he sees sleeping in, 12 hours and how his friends view it as just, a normal thing.
Totally. It highlights how different depression is from just being tired.
Yeah. It's a whole other level of fatigue.
And he gets back together with Annika, but their relationship is also this, push and pull dynamic, which seems to mirror what's happening with Spanley.
It's like he's drawn to these intense, unstable relationships, even in his personal life, and it probably just amplified his mood swings even more.
Yeah. There's this company celebration, everyone in red corduroy, a moment of success. And then Andy describes, this sudden shift from depression into hypomania.
Which shows just how unpredictable bipolar disorder can be, these rapid changes in mood.
And then he breaks up with Annika after checking her phone, initially blaming her reaction. But later, he realizes that, he couldn't handle the situation maturely. It's a moment of self-awareness, even if it's painful.
It's like he's starting to see his own patterns, how his moods and behaviors are contributing to the problems.
The conflict with Spanley keeps escalating, and Andy feels like he's fighting a two-front war, internal and external. It must have been exhausting.
Imagine dealing with, all that internal turmoil and then having this huge conflict with your business partner on top of it. It's no wonder he's struggling.
He starts therapy with Rachel, but he's hesitant to fully engage, partly because of the cost, partly because of the stigma. And then she asks him this question, Andy, are you in touch with anger? And he realizes he can't really answer that.
It suggests he's been suppressing his emotions, not really acknowledging or dealing with them.
He eventually tells Spanley about his bipolar diagnosis, but Spanley's reaction is pretty muted, just like Annika's had been. And I think Andy is looking for more, some kind of deeper response.
Yeah, he wants validation, support, and he's not really getting it. It leaves him feeling kind of lost.
He goes to a new psychiatrist, really hesitant about taking antidepressants because of the risk of triggering mania.
Yeah.
And that's when they introduce Lamictal, a mood stabilizer.
It's a different approach, trying to prevent the extreme highs and lows.
But even just taking that first pill, it's this huge mental hurdle for him. It shows how much stigma he still feels about the diagnosis, about taking medication.
It's a big step, admitting you need help, accepting the treatment.
Meanwhile, the relationship with Spanley is just deteriorating. Andy's doing this investigation into Spanley's performance, but it feels like he's already made up his mind.
Right, he's looking for evidence to justify what he already wants to do, which is get rid of Spanley.
And it all comes to a head. Andy blows up at Spanley, and then he starts actively working to push him out of the company. It's the end of their partnership.
It's sad, It started with so much promise, but their different visions, the power struggles, and then Andy's own mental health. It all just became too much.
So in part 4, there's a new direction for bonobos. But those underlying cycles, they keep happening. After Spanley leaves, Andy goes through this period of hypomania, can't stand to be alone. He talks about admiring Tony Hsieh from Zappos, which is kind of ironic given Spanley's own struggles.
Yeah, it shows that external success doesn't always equal internal peace. Right.
And the company goes through this shift, trying to become more of a venture-backed technology company. And it creates this whole cultural clash within bonobos.
They hire all these engineers from Zappos, but the core pants business starts to slow down. It kind of validates Spanley's earlier concerns about growing too quickly, hiring too fast.
And you can see Like the loss of that more grounded perspective really hurt them.
It's like they're chasing the next big thing, and they're losing sight of what made them successful in the first place.
And there's this moment where Andy's on a fundraising trip to San Francisco, and his Amex gets declined. It's like a slap in the face, right? A reminder of how precarious their financial situation actually is.
Yeah, it's a wake-up call. But then right after that, he gets this unexpected investment from Matt Wilsey. It's just like classic startup chaos.
Up and down, up and down.
Totally. And Andy talks about the dual nature of hypomania, how it can help him raise money and attract talent, but also how easily it can tip over into full-blown mania. It's a very self-aware observation.
He's recognizing those patterns in himself, which is important.
It's crucial for managing his condition.
They end up raising venture capital from Lightspeed and Excel. And there's this whole backstory about how they initially turned down a smaller investment from Excel, which is interesting. It shows a bit of their strategic thinking.
Yeah, they were playing the long game. And on the day of the big presentation to Excel, his niece is born. It's just a powerful, like, personal moment happening alongside this professional milestone.
It's a nice reminder that there's more to life than just work. And then Spaley agrees to sell a big chunk of his shares, which eases the financial pressure on bonobos. And I think for Andy, there's a sense of relief, like he's fulfilled some obligation.
It helps to close that chapter, you know. They can both move on.
But then Jeremy Liu from Lightspeed makes this cryptic comment about Tony Tsai, and then he suggests that Andy step aside from day-to-day operations.
Even though they just raised all this money, there's still concerns about Andy's leadership, you know, probably because of his unpredictable behavior.
And Andy talks about how uncomfortable he is with the label bipolar disorder, but he's also starting to accept it. That's a big step.
It's a process, right? Coming to terms with a diagnosis like that.
He meets Leonard, this executive coach who's also a former psychiatrist. And Leonard initially thinks Andy doesn't have bipolar disorder, which must have been such a relief, even if it was ultimately wrong.
It's like getting that false sense of hope, but it probably also delayed getting him the right treatment.
Yeah. And he meets Mark Lohr, who gives him advice about hiring based on passion, cultural fit. And you can see how that influences Andy's approach to building his team.
It's about finding people who are not just skilled, but also aligned with the company's values, right?
Exactly. The guy chops, they become a big success. So does the Nordstrom partnership. But Andy says he learned this crucial lesson. An elevated mood state can be even more dangerous than depression.
That's a huge realization. It's not just about the lows, you know?
Yeah.
The highs can lead to impulsive, risky behavior, which can be really damaging.
And during this time, he's doing some angel investing, even buys his parents a place. It's like a period of stability, giving back.
It's using his success to support his family, which is great.
But then they start rapidly expanding the guide shops, and it creates this, what he calls, new leadership pathology.
Yeah.
All the focus is on new ventures, not on profitability. And the burn rate is going up, and they need to raise a big Series D round, but it's not going well.
It's like they're falling back into old patterns, that impulsive growth, not focusing enough on the core business.
Right. And then there's this whole blow-up with Brian Wolf at the holiday party about hiring and profitability, and Andy basically dismisses Wolf's concerns and then fires him. And the way he describes the firing, like this extravagant lunch, it's so bizarre.
It shows how out of touch he was, you know, not taking those financial concerns seriously.
But personally, things are looking up. He and Manuela get back together, and their early dates, there are these really significant moments that feel almost destined, you know.
It's like they're meant to be together.
But then, boom, manic episode in Vegas. He's convinced the plane is going to crash. He's talking about serving God. He's having these strange interactions with objects, with people. It's another complete break from reality.
And it's scary how quickly it happens, how intense the delusions become.
And they just escalate. He thinks he has a solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And like, the grandiosity is off the charts.
It shows just how distorted his thinking has become.
Okay, so part 5, this is the crisis, the reckoning, and then finally acceptance. He's flying to Chicago, his behavior's getting more erratic, and there are these moments where he's like sorting his watches, trying to regain some control.
It's that in-between state, right, where he's coming out of the mania but still struggling to grasp reality.
And even after he sleeps, he's still convinced he's communicating telepathically with Manuela. It shows how powerful those delusions can be, how long they can linger.
It takes time to fully come back from an episode like that.
And he makes this huge decision to bring in Fran as CEO, essentially firing himself. It's a real acknowledgement of his limitations in that moment.
It's a big step. He's putting the company first, recognizing he's not in a good place to lead.
But then he experiences this deep depression in Beijing, and it really shows how much bonobos had become this, like, anchor for him, this stabilizing force in his life.
It's the complexity of work and mental health, right? Sometimes work can be a source of stress, but sometimes it provides structure and purpose.
And then he comes back to New York, and he gets his job back. It shows his resilience, but also maybe this inability to fully let go.
Yeah, it's a pattern we've seen throughout the book.
And then another manic episode hits. This time it's triggered by cultural experiences, seeing Hamilton, and he's back to thinking he's the Messiah, interpreting everything in these bizarre ways. The story about the dragon poster and the piglet drawing is just wild.
It shows how seemingly random things can trigger these episodes.
And his behavior with Manuela, it becomes erratic, and it culminates in this violent outburst. It's a really scary escalation.
It's a reminder that mania isn't just about, being happy and energetic. It can be really dangerous, even violent.
And he ends up at the CPEP at Bellevue, completely disoriented, days and nights blurring together.
It's a stark and probably terrifying environment.
And then comes the arrest, the assault charges. The weight of all that, plus seeing his family at the police station, that must have been crushing.
It's like hitting rock bottom, facing the consequences of his actions.
He's released on ACD with conditions, and he acknowledges the role privilege played in that outcome, which is important.
Not everyone in that situation would get the same treatment.
He starts recovering at a hotel with his family, but he immediately wants to get back to work.
It shows his drive, but also maybe a reluctance to fully face what happened.
And he does go back to the office, carefully, has this tough conversation with the board. His sister's there for support, and Leonard is helping him. And he gets introduced to Dr. Z, who becomes his psychiatrist. It's the start of a more sustainable recovery process.
It's about building that support network, having people around him who understand and can help him manage his condition.
The charges get dismissed. He slowly reconciles with Manuela and her mother. His family is so supportive. It's all part of the healing process.
It takes time, It's not an overnight thing.
And he's finding things to be grateful for, even in this difficult period. His therapy with Dr. Z leads to a full acceptance of his bipolar diagnosis. And I think that's a real turning point.
It's not about denying it anymore. It's about understanding it, managing it.
And he keeps taking Lamictal, but he's dealing with depression now, and they're trying to treat it without triggering another manic episode. A constant balancing act. And eventually, Wellbutrin works for him.
It shows how complex treatment can be, Finding the right medication combination, adjusting the dosages. It takes time and patience.
And then he proposes to Manuela, and she says yes. It's such a beautiful moment. It's like a testament to their love, their commitment to each other.
They've been through so much together.
Okay, part 6. We're in the home stretch. The assault case is dismissed, and there's this great story about his lifelong love for the Chicago Cubs.
He talks about their unwavering optimism, and it becomes this metaphor for his own journey.
And it culminates in him, frantically trying to get to Game 7 of the World Series. It's such a great image.
He's a fighter, he doesn't give up easily.
He reflects on the board's reactions to his various pronouncements about his role at Bonobos. It shows the ongoing challenge of being a leader while managing a mental health condition.
It's finding that balance, being honest about his limitations, but also showing he can still lead effectively.
And there's the lead up to the Walmart acquisition, the impact of sleep deprivation, his emotions at Manuela's bridal shower, these intense swings during a Holocaust remembrance service. It all just underscores the constant vigilance required in managing bipolar disorder.
It's never over, It's something he has to be mindful of every day.
And Manuela, she's so important in that. She's his rock. And his mom, her reaction to learning about his episodes, it's so heartwarming.
It shows the power of family support, having people who love you unconditionally.
And then the birth of his son, Isaiah. And he's so aware of the potential for postpartum mania. It's like all of his experiences have led him to this moment.
He's a father now, and he knows he can never let up on managing his mental health.
And the book ends with this powerful image of him looking at his sleeping son, knowing he has to keep fighting. It's a really moving ending.
It's about hope, and the commitment to being the best version of himself for his son, for his family.
So this deep dive into burn rate, it's been a journey, right? It's given us this raw, honest look at the intersection of entrepreneurship and mental health.
It's a reminder that success doesn't look the same for everyone and that it's okay to struggle, it's okay to ask for help.
And I think that's a powerful message for all of us, no matter what our career path, no matter what our personal challenges are.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to our final thought. How can we as a society reduce the stigma around mental health, especially in these high-pressure environments? How can we create a culture where people feel safe talking about their struggles and seeking help? It's a question worth thinking about.
Definitely. We need to start talking about these things more openly, supporting each other and breaking down those barriers.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah.
See you next time.